Welcome back to Zenith Poker. Today we'll be continuing our discussion of small blind versus big blind 2-bet pots. And we'll specifically be looking at the turn probe and river probe lines in the connected mid board type. So as we remember from the last lecture, the check through line is very common on the flop. And it's very common because there's a lot of equity to protect. And so the small blind is going to be checking at quite a high frequency, and then the big blind will be checking back also at a relatively high frequency because the big blind's got a lot of very sort of weak hands which would have missed the flop. When the big blind does bet, they end up betting quite big. So say, for example, they're betting this 3/4 pot and pot size bet and all this half pot bet. Relatively big compared to the small blind who will bet relatively small sort of quarter pot and half pot type sizes. And when the big blind does bet these sizes, the small blind fairly rarely raises, only down at 6.42%. Overall, across these sort of 22 flops, equally weighted, you've got like 55-60% checking frequency for the small blind, and then sort of 65-70% checking frequency, closer to 65 probably, checking frequency for the big blind. So the check through line and subsequent turn and river play is going to be quite important because it's the most common line. And so knowing how to play the different turns in these lines will be important as well. So first off, we'll take a look at some bricks in the check through line. So small blind versus big blind. Small blind opens this sort of range. If we look at the weighted mode, this sort of range. And what kinds of hands are in the checking line at a relatively high frequency. Sort of you can see these very weak sort of pairs and a lot of these ace high type hands checking through at quite a good frequency. So an easy way to take a look is you can see the entire decision, you see the numbers here, and then you look at the check and you see that it's much heavier in sort of middle pairs, weak pairs, ace highs, and some other kinds of draws. The big blind, on the other hand, also checks back a fair amount of ace high, although they are betting quite a lot of ace high as well. And then a lot of these pairs will be checking back these weak pairs, weak pocket pairs, middle pairs, and all these unmade hands which don't really have any kind of draws will be checking back. So looking at the turn report, and we can see sort of on the left here, we can see the sort of the relative strength of each card for the small blind. An ace, a king, queen, a 9, and 8. A lot of these are pretty good for the small blind. You can see in the green versus in the red, the 5s, 4s, 3s, 2s, 6s, 7s, not quite as good. The 5 that completes a straight, so it's not really a brick. That completes the 7-6 straight, so it's not really a brick. But definitely the 4, the 3, and the 2, these 9 cards here are sort of relative bricks. I mean, the diamond brings the backdoor flush draw, so not super brick, but definitely 4, 3, and 2. Relatively bricky cards. If the straight comes in, it's not super good for the small blind because the big blind will have caught up. In this particular line, after the big blind checks back the flop, the big blind would have bet a lot of their strong hands on the flop. So say, for example, here they're betting a lot of their straights, sets, and 2 pairs. So when they check back and they make a new straight, that's really good for the big blind in terms of overall range, sort of equity and EV. EV being kind of quite similar to the overall equity. Looking at the EV, it's the same sort of story going on. So let's have a look at a relative brick first. So where is this brick here? 25s, roughly in the middle. Let's go 3 of clubs. So relative brick. And because it's a brick for both players, the big blind hasn't really caught up in terms of making a new straight. But they would have made some 2 pairs with the 3. So for example, they're checking back hands like Queen 3, 9, 3 type stuff. Right, and also the pocket 3s has become a new set, so it's not the end of the world for the big blind. They do have some decent hands, but now with that brick and with one fewer card to change the board, top pair is much stronger. Top pair here for the small blind often leading out betting sort of these pot size bets here. Queen Jack, Queen 10. Most of the Queen X actually can bet the pot size bet, and obviously the other pairs of kings being the pot size bet. Aces mixing between betting the pot size bet and checking, paying attention to those suits. If you're looking at the subtlety of the suits, you can do a thing or two with the ace of hearts here. But the main idea is aces, because it blocks the ace high, might benefit from either check raising this street or check raising the next street. But kings not so much. So a lot of these Queen X hands will be betting, and they'll be betting relatively big for this pot size bet. There is also the possibility of going for a small sort of block bet here. Say, for example, second pair, going for a small quarter pot block bet. Reason being is because if the small blind checks, the big blind is going to be betting top pair anyway. So you can bet quarter pot. Some of those top pairs, some of those stronger top pairs are going to raise. But you can get called by worse. You can get called by the weak pairs, ace highs type hands for the small size. And then you see the river, and then you can evaluate your relative hand strength on the river. Same goes for pocket jacks, pocket tens. Pocket jacks, pocket tens are pretty nice, blocking the nut straight, even though we're not super concerned about the big blind having a nut straight, but they do draw to a decent straight if they've hit one of those 4 outs with a gut shot. Okay, so that's an example of a relative brick. We'll look at sort of a bricky flush completing card. So when the flush completes in this sort of check line, who has more flushes? I mean, it appears it will depend on the rank of this suit. So say, for example, the ace of hearts comes. The big one's going to have more flushes because a lot of their pre-flop range is sort of this low bottom right, contains a low flush card. So the big one will have a fair amount of flushes on the high ranked flush completing cards, but on the low ranked flush completing cards, the big blind will have much fewer flushes because the board simply blocks those flushes. When there's flushes for both players, hands are still relatively top pair is still relatively strong, but nowhere near as strong as when when it's a total brick. So just comparing the 3 of hearts to the 3 of clubs, you've got all of these top pairs which are still betting, but they're betting a different size now. They're betting a slightly smaller size. Instead of betting pot size bet, they're betting half pot size bet. Right, so they're still trying to get some value, and it's the same sort of hands which are making this play. But now just going for sort of a half pot bet instead. Okay. And again, once again, you can do sort of this sort of small block bet with a 9 if you want to. And then sort of playing on the river from there. If it's a relative brick on the river, I mean, your top pair is pretty happy, but you don't really want to get too much money in, so you're going to be betting a relatively small size. So here, betting half pot and quarter pot with the top pair, and then if you get raised, you kind of are indifferent at best. Just quickly compare that to when the 3 of clubs comes, you're betting. Sort of the pot size bet, and then you get another brick, and you're just potting it again with the strong top pairs, and then going sort of half pot with the weaker top pairs. So knowing the relative hand strength tells you roughly how much money you should be putting in with all these top pairs. So when the 3 of hearts comes, you still want to be putting a little money in, but you don't want to put too much in. But when it goes brick on turn and river, you really just want to sort of pile it in and go pot, and then win a bigger pot. Okay, so that's quickly looking at this kind of board. We'll move on to a different kind of board and then look at when sort of we get sort of 4 straights. So 9-7-5. It's going to be a lot of checking for both players here. Check. I mean, 9-7-5 is a little bit of an exception to the rule. I mean, I said most of the time the big blind's going to be betting a bit bigger because 9-7-5 makes so many pairs for the big blind, and sort of there's overcards to try to deny equity from. The big blind is going to be wanting to bet only half pot, and then the small blind instead when they've got a strong hand like a straight or a set or an overpair. These overpairs, tens and jacks in particular, want to bet a little bit bigger, and the reason why is because there's only one combination of of straight on this board. So it's not, sorry, one type of straight on this board, specifically the 8-6. So when there's just the 8-6 and the big blind doesn't really have all the combinations of A6 offsuit, sure, it's got all the A6 suited. So the 8-6 does represent some straights, but it's nowhere near as much on this kind of board as the other boards. So on this kind of board, sure, there's 8-6 to worry about in terms of the straights, but there's not. That's only one particular type of straight. If it was 9-7-6, then you've got two different types of straights, right? Or if it's 9-8-7, then you've got three different types of straights. And when there's a lot more straights, you don't really want to be going too crazy with the other pairs. But here, when there's only one type of straight, and the big one doesn't have all the offsuit combinations of them, you can bet quite big with the other pairs. But anyway, let's have a look at the check through line. So if it goes check check, and we can take a look quickly at the turn report. If it goes check check, and one of those straight completing cards, here the 6 and the 8, looking at the overall EVs and seeing where it ranks. The 8 ranks quite poorly for the small blind. The 6 ranks quite poorly for the small blind. The 5, which completes the bottom pair of trips, ranks quite poorly for the small blind. And in comparison, those over cards rank quite well. And this kind of EV difference between the two kind of shows you why the big blind is only betting half pot on this board. Big one's only betting half pot because it wants to deny equity from overcards which hit these ranks up top here, which is all of the deck, right? You've got sort of like 10s through aces, and that's 20 cards out of the deck of that the small blind can hit. Anyway, checks through, and we'll take a look at, let's say, the ace of spades. Ace of spades, really good for the big blind, and quite poor for the small blind. Big blind, right, will have had a lot of 6x in their preflop range and has now made a straight. And also, there is also the jack 10 as well. So it just went from there being almost no straights to there being a load of straights for both players. And looking at the relative frequencies, here 12.3% straights for the small blind. And all that jack 10 would have bet the flop. So there's a lot less of it in the check through line. So a lot of it bets for both players. But the main thing is that there's not a huge amount of jack 10 for the small blind. And there's not a lot of 6x because there's not a lot of 6x pre-flop for the small blind. But in comparison, the big blind's got a lot more 6x. And the big blind's also made some 2 pairs as well. So looking at this, 12.3% for the small blind and 16.1% for the big blind. Because of this sort of EV shift, the small blind is now going to want to be checking a lot more. These overpairs that failed at check raise, the pocket 10s, pocket jacks, are now just going to be one to bet. And you'll see that on a lot of different turn cards if it checks through on sort of these low boards, which aren't, sort of these low boards. If it checks through, those overpairs that are just above it still want to deny equity. And if they miss their check raise by just having it check through, they're usually just going to want to bet the turn. So for example, 2 of spades, 10s and jacks, just betting the turn now. Anyway, so 8 of spades, check. The small blind's bet size, half pot, quarter pot, really betting small and trying to deny equity, get a little bit of value. The straight with a jack 10, not a huge number of combinations of them, but a lot more combinations of the 6x. You can't bet too big because you run into a 6, right? So say for example you bet pot size bet. I mean, most of the continuing range, you're calling, you're continuing about half the time, and 16% of the range is a straight. So suddenly the straight going from 16% to 32% of the range after you bet a pot size bet means that on a lot of rivers you're going to have difficulty getting value from with any hand. Really, even a straight's not going to have an easy time getting value from a range that's that heavy in straights. So betting, probing here for half pot, getting a call. Say for example we get a rook on the river, and now a lot of those straights and pairs and stuff are going to be blocking, and betting or betting half pot. These other pairs, we could these top pairs betting small or checking, and then stronger hands such as 2 pairs over pairs, sets and sort of the straight with the 6, betting a bit bigger, And if you get raised small, the straight is the only hand that's really not indifferent. All the other hands are bluff catchers, sets, etc. Now bluff catchers after half pot and then raise here. Same here as a raise on the turn. A lot of these hands will start to be indifferent at some stage. Obviously, it's difficult to make a set indifferent in a line like this because the sets have draw equity to a boat still on the turn. And obviously, there's not quite as much money that's been put in, yeah. So bet call. And now, of course, like if you end up having the nuts, just find a way to get all the money in. So that's kind of the moral of the story here. Like this Jack 10, it just rips it for 8 times the pot. So yeah, don't be afraid to do that, or go for like the check jam. Okay. Now let's have a look at another one, and we'll look at 10-9-7, and we'll look at some overcards. So here 10-9-7, relatively good for the small blind in terms of hitting the 10 and the 9, right? Having a lot of these offsuit 10s and 9s in the small blind range means that there's going to be a fair few number of pairs that can bet. On the other hand, the big blind's going to have a lot of these straights, 8-6 and the Jack 8. We talked about 8-6 last time, but Jack 8, including Jack 8 offsuit. How many combinations we have of Jack 8 offsuit? Not quite a lot of them. A lot more 8-6, but definitely all the Jack 8 suited and Queen 8-6 suited. So there is a few combinations of straights here for the big blind. And when the small blind checks, the big blind is going to take a very polar line and be betting sort of this 3/4 pot size bet with the straights and sets and 2 pairs and stuff for value. Top pair kind of just betting and then checking back on later street. And then the check back line will look at the turn. 10-9-7. I mean, the 10 already being a Broadway card, not quite as much overcard type equity to deny on this sort of board. If there is sort of like a half pot bet, it is pretty easy. You're going to get raised quite frequently by any straights here, and then also the pocket jacks, right? Which really wants to go for a check raise against a small bet, and even against these bigger bets, jacks are still going to go for that check raise. Jack really needs to deny equity, right? It doesn't have a stunning amount of equity, only at around 70% in both of these lines here. But it blocking the nut straight Jack 8 and drawing to a new straight if the 8 comes and being ahead of all these top pairs means that it really wants to go for some kind of aggressive action on this street to get value from weaker pairs and deny equity from these overcards, which there are a lot of. Okay, so looking at the check through line here, which cards are better for the small blind? The overcards, right? So the ace, quite obviously, because the ace is very heavy in ace-x pre-flop compared to the big blind. But other hands like kings, queens, jacks, basically the overcards. So we'll take a look at some of these. We'll take a look at the ace of spades, for example. Probably one of the best cards for the small blind. Suddenly has now made a lot of new top pairs, 19% new top pairs, compared to only 11% for the small blind. So for the big blind. So the small blind's way ahead in top pairs. And also these top pairs are just in general stronger than the big blind's top pairs. So these new top pairs are going to have quite a good kicker, right? So say for example ace king, ace queen, ace jack, ace 10 is 2 pair. So a lot of those hands will really like to bet and just go for a pot size bet here. The ace hasn't really improved too many of the big blind's hands because a lot of hands like ace 10, right, will have bet the flop. So Sure, the big blind's going to have created some new 2 pairs with the ace, and new top pairs with the ace, but if you've got ace king, you kind of block that 2 pairs, so you don't really have to worry about it. You try and get value from 10, 9, 7 type hands, straight draws type hands. It's going for that pot size bet. And a lot of these hands with some kind of additional draw will call you, and obviously top pair will call you as well. And then sort of on not a club, sorry, not a heart, on a relatively brick river, just betting again, or just going bet for these bigger sizes, really gets that value. When you've got a hand like ace king, ace queen, just go pot, right? And then they're going to have to just hero call with an ace or with a 10. And it's difficult for them to really have anything because basically all of their straights would have either bet the flop, raise the turn, or the sets, the set of 9s, set of 7s raises here on the turn. Even a lot of these two pairs raise here on the turn. So there's not a lot on a brick river for the small blind to actually have. And so if you've got top pair with a good kicker, after it goes checked on the flop, you make the new ace, and then you get a brick river. You can just go pretty much ham, just pot into your opponent. Sure, you have to worry about a little bit of 2 pair, but it's not a huge amount. Mainly like things get dicey if you make the new top pair and then like the flush comes in. I mean, yeah, top pairs still wants to bet to get called by worse, but like it doesn't really want to run into a flush. And it does this sort of quarter pot block bet type thing there on the river there. So that's that. Other kinds of overcards, say for example, ace of clubs brings a backdoor flush draw in. I mean, it's slightly more equity for the big blind because they've got the backdoor flush draw to defend as well. So you're looking at here, a lot of the flush draws continue, except for the 2 undercard type flush draws. Basically, you've got 2 different types of flush draws, and then even though there's a pot size bet, when one completes, it's really good for the big blind because when the small blind here checks, the other missed flush draw can basically just bluff. And bluffing for like half pot bet there. Ace of hearts, overcard brings in the flush. Same kind of deal in terms of you still want to bet your top pair, but because it's a flush for both players now to worry about, as we discussed earlier, you're not betting the same size. You're not going for the pot size bet, right? With the ace king, ace queen, you're going for this half pot, quarter pot bet instead. So you're sizing down your bets, and then if you get raised, you're not loving yourself because you're running into a flush all the time. And then when sort of it bricks out in the river, you can still get some value by betting relatively small. And then if you get raised, once again, you're indifferent. So when the flush completes on the turn with the overcard, sure, your overcard still wants to bet for value, but you're not betting quite as big. So, for example, here, Queen of Hearts, a lot of these Queen X, a lot of these stronger Queen X, those new overpairs, overpairs which missed the check raise or check the flop, and now just betting sort of half pot here. But say, for example, Queen of Diamonds, right? Those same hands have now shifted upwards in terms of their bet sizes, right? So when the flush comes in with the overcard, you're betting smaller. You're betting small on both streets, you're betting small on the turn, and you're betting small on the river. And the opponent will basically raise those flushes and straights on the river. But when you get a relative brick here, you get an overcard that doesn't complete any flushes. This particular overcard, like the queen and the king, both complete straights as well compared to the ace. That's why the ace is so good; doesn't really complete any straights. So that's why on an ace, like the most prevalent bet size is this pot size bet. But on a king and on a queen, it goes to this half pot being taken slightly more often. That's because the presence of the new straight that's come in. So say for example, half pot here, if you get raised, right, on this particular street, you're not loving yourself, but after it goes bet call, river brick, bet again on the river, and then you get raised, then it's not so great for you. Or like if you pot it on the river. So seeing whether or not looking at the bet size that you put on here on the turn, and then seeing what the river card actually is, and then you can change your bet size on the river accordingly based on that bet size. Okay, so that's a bit of an overview of some of these check through lines on the flop and sort of these turn probes. In the next one, yeah. So hopefully you guys have learned a few things about sort of this turn probe line, and sort of judging the relative strength of hands based on what the turn card actually is, and then sort of sizing your bets accordingly on both the turn and the river. In the next one, we will continue on and look at sort of defending against these sort of polar sizes from the big blind when you're in the small blind, and if you're in the big blind, using these big polar sizes on the flop, and how you're going to be playing the turns and rivers after you make this big bet. So thanks for watching this video, and I'll see you all in the next one. Bye now.